So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the annual summit of the Greater Portland Council of Governments and the Portland Area Comprehensive Transportation System, or simply PACS. It's great to have you here. My name is Nat Tupper, and I'm the town manager for the town of Yarmouth. And I've had the great privilege of serving as president of GPCOG over the past year. We have some great speakers lined up with some important information and insights to share. And there will be some opportunities for breakout group discussions to help you explore ideas that are shared and hopefully to deepen some relationships. We're going to get to all that soon, but first you have to listen to me. I don't know about you, but the last 15 months have been the longest 7 years of my life. The challenges presented by the pandemic, by racial, social, and political unrest and violence in the country, the strain on community and family connections, and quite frankly, the caustic undermining of faith in the institutions of American democracy, as well as the economic upheaval, has been a lot. It has just been too much. And there have been times when I'll admit that I've been either exhausted or just frustrated. And I have in those times wondered, perhaps you have done something similar, I've wondered, is the work that we have committed our lives to doing, the building and engaging and serving of communities, has it all been for naught? But I am very happy to discover over and over again, and frequently through my work with GPCOG and the region, is that it is not all for naught. It matters. The work we do matters a lot. We in public service and local government in particular are the center that holds. And the work that we do together through COG and PACS, through EcoMaine, MMA, Cumberland County, our regional authorities, it's what holds us together and makes us better able to withstand and respond to the challenges that our communities face. And the renewed and the most welcome restoration of partnership and respect by and between state government, local government, and all state agencies is more than just a breath of fresh air. It has been a true game changer. I'm especially proud of the work of GPCOG and its staff in the past year or so. The Portland Press Herald noted in an article back in December of 2020, the change or the value of GPCOG when they wrote, and I quote, GPCOG has become a dynamic organization under new leadership and in a changing landscape that demands more cooperation among cities and towns on issues ranging from the opioid crisis to COVID-19 and from racial injustice to homelessness. And I think you all know there's many, many more areas where we work together and need to. So I don't even dare try to list all the places and the ways that GPCOG has responded to the changing landscape, but I'll note 3 or 4. The Maine Economic Recovery Program, which in partnership with the state helped 1,400 small businesses with over $67 million in CARES Act assistance in our region. In broadband, GPCOG took a leadership role with the Maine Broadband Coalition, working with the community, with the local, county, and state agencies to expand connectivity in our region and statewide. Hang on, somebody's texting me and I'm afraid they're telling me my mic's not on. The Resilience Corps, GPCOG brought on 14 bright and talented AmeriCorps fellows to work in the region on a wide variety of projects and issues, and their work is noted and helping enormously. COG continues to support work in land use, regional and transportation planning functions, in saving its member towns and cities hundreds of thousands of dollars through our joint purchasing services. And the game has stepped up considerably for COG in its role as convener and information sharing hub for all of its members. And we have a very ambitious agenda and a work plan to be teed up to continue this great work and to build and improve on what's been accomplished. And we most want to strengthen our partnerships and our friendships throughout the region. So it's been an extraordinarily productive year in extraordinary times. And I'm most grateful to the staff, the executive committee members, to all of you for the work that you have accomplished. Thank you. So I won't talk anymore. I'm going to turn this over to Matt Sturgis, Cape Elizabeth Town Manager and our most affable and able chair of the PACS, so he can share about PAC's busy and productive year as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Nat. And I want to take the opportunity to thank you for your exemplary leadership over the past year. It's been truly a pleasure to work with you, as well as to enjoy watching your steady and stable hand on the tiller, as well as the humor that you would bring to a lot of what we had to do in very challenging times. To keep a calm head in such circumstances is truly an honor to watch, and you are a great leader, and definitely appreciate all of your efforts. And it's I've admired you for many years, as you know, as we all have, but it's been great to see it in action this year, especially, as you say. It's been a year that's been more of a dog's year than a human year, to say the least. So thank you for your excellent efforts.
Thank you.
So PACS, I want to say welcome to everybody as well to the Society of Acronyms. This is a really big celebration today for the acronym capital of organizations, GPCOG and PACS, and all the associated acronyms that come with it. You end up walking away with a PhD by the time you are through your tenure. But PACS is a critical part of GPCOG, and it's setting transportation priorities, allocating funding for projects, and planning ahead, and ensuring this transportation work supports the region's economy, housing, and natural resource protection. By helping our members define and support regional transportation priorities, PACS supports roads and bridges, with vital infrastructure for our economy and our citizens, public transportation, vital lifelines for our residents, sidewalks and bikeways to support the safety of everyone. Now, in a normal year, the member of PACS allocate over $25 million in federal funding. This year was not normal, and PACS had to play a bigger role than ever in public transportation. We're programming over $53 million of additional federal CARES Act relief funding for public transportation. We launched a public relations campaign with all 7 transit agencies to help rebuild ridership. And we're submitting earmarks for top regional intersection, paving, signal, and transit priorities. PACS also streamlined its internal structure and added community voices to its decision-making. And that has been just a great element of development over the past year. Very excited to see that go forward. It adopted a new funding framework to score project proposals that is data-based and evaluates transit, road, and active transportation together. And finally, the excellent transportation planning work PACS provides continued. We won an award for the South Portland Mall Transit-Oriented Development Plan by great staff work, completed a long-range plan for public transportation called Transit Tomorrow, which will help us shape where we are going for the next 30 years, hopefully. And as Nat said, this is just a quick overview of all the highlights. Now, with that being said, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce GPCOG's Executive Director and my friend, Christina Egan.
Thanks so much, Matt. It's an honor to be your friend. Thank you for calling me that. I consider you and Nat both friends also. And I want to thank both you and Nat because it's been a really tough year and we really needed strong leaders, both at PACS and at GPCOG, and leaders that understood the importance of regional cooperation and were collaborative and funny. We definitely needed humor in our meetings this year as we were going through a lot of tough things. And both of you did this despite having the responsibilities of running towns. And that's a huge full-time day job. And you've just given us so much of your time and your thoughts and your wisdom this year. So thank you to you both. It has been an extraordinary year of challenges, and I think at this point, I know I'm feeling optimistic. We're going to celebrate some things that we've done in the region. And we're also going to be looking to the future about how we can become stronger and come out of the pandemic as an even stronger and more resilient and more prosperous region. And last year, our guest speaker joined us as we were all starting to lock arms and figuring out how to help our communities and our people be healthy, and also to weather the economic shutdown. And I'm very pleased that she's joining us again a year later as Maine is starting to emerge from the pandemic. I'm delighted to have Hannah Pingree, who is the director of the Governor's Office of Policy and Innovation. She has a very big charge. The policy office says that it's working on fostering collaboration and innovative solutions to help solve Maine's most important long-term challenges. So she's got a big charge and she's got a big portfolio. She's been working on building the economy, workforce attraction and retention, opioid response. She has a children's cabinet to help our kids throughout the state. And she's also been leading the state's climate work. I'm really delighted to welcome Hannah Pingree to the virtual stage. There you are. Hi, Hannah.
I'm glad you showed that picture of me when I was much younger, pre-pandemic. We were all, as Nat said, it's been a long year.
It's been a long year. I've got a few extra gray hairs after this year. I don't know about you. I am really, really happy to have you come back after a year. It's been quite a year. And let's just start on a personal note. So how are you doing? And how's your family doing after this year?
Well, all I can say is that we're glad it's springtime. Summer is on the horizon. I know it has been a long year for all of us, a long year plus. Again, as Nat said, it feels like about 7 years. We're all doing okay. I'm glad my kids are back in school. They got a couple weeks to go. Clearly for my family, and I'm sure for many of your families and the people of Maine, this has been a long haul. It's been scary at times. It's been wild. We've had weeks and months of kids at home with homeschooling or hybrid schooling. My husband has carried a heavy load. So I know there's a lot of talk about moms and dads who've really done a lot. And it's been wild here at times. So I'm appreciative of him, and I'm appreciative for, again, the teachers and childcare workers, as well as, community officials who've really helped us carry the load for the state as we've all survived this past year. So I'm now feeling more optimistic. I'm looking forward to summer, and I think there's a lot of optimism about the state of Maine. I think we've all been in a pretty challenging place for the last year. So I'm excited about the future.
I'm so glad to hear that. I had my first non-family hug this week, and I ate in a restaurant inside without a mask. My son is getting his second vaccination. He's 15. He's getting that really soon. And with summer around the corner, I am feeling very personally optimistic. I'm delighted to hear that you're feeling that way about Maine as well. I'm feeling that way too. I would love to talk a little bit about the Mills administration's working goals. And, you've got a lot going on. We talked a little bit about how the office has a very big portfolio. So I'm going to ask you to do something really hard, which is, can you boil it down to a couple of the top priorities that the Mills administration is working on right now, particularly trying to help us economically recover?
Yeah, no, I think it's my office really works on behalf of the governor and her most significant initiatives. She is still in the mode of getting us to the end of this pandemic. Our whole team has been really focused on everything from managing the pandemic to vaccinations to, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel and helping our businesses, our communities recover. So that is still the primary goal, is successfully see our way to the end of this pandemic. And again, I think we're all feeling really optimistic. The people of Maine have stepped up in a big way. That is good news. So I would say throughout it, we were very engaged with the Governor's Economic Recovery Committee. It is now all about helping our economy and our people recover. And then, really, the thing that I know, Christina, you're really good at promoting is building resilience for the long term in our economy, in our communities, for issues like climate. So there's a lot of specific work to do, everything from, we certainly learned about the need for high-speed broadband access across our state. We are certainly watching and engaging in housing challenges, other infrastructure challenges that it's really now clear how much we need things like affordable childcare access, high quality broadband, housing in communities where people want to live and work. So we're sort of these kind of core challenges to our economy we're focused on. And again, actually a big one is workforce. We are recovering. We are doing everything we can to support businesses and nonprofits who are trying to also recover, but making sure we have a trained workforce ready to do all the things we want to do. Obviously, we're hearing a lot about that challenge, and the governor's very focused on it. So doing all the things. We didn't even really bring up issues like opioids. There's still a lot that was on the radar before, and it's still important, but really economic recovery and the pieces of that is our major focus.
So you just had a lot of different issues, and why don't we dive into a couple of them? And we'll start with the workforce one, because it feels a little like whiplash, right? Like people were losing their jobs, and now businesses, as I'm hearing them in our region, are desperate for workers. So what are some of the things that you're doing right now to try to make sure that we have the staff that we need in order for the economy to really ramp back up?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I remember, just before the pandemic hit, we were having very similar conversations with employers, with higher education, with our state CTEs, how do we attract the workers to Maine? Because frankly, we don't have enough workers to fill all of the roles we need. How do we make sure that they're trained in the sectors which are growing in Maine? Obviously, we want Mainers to have good paying jobs and helping people connect to those through training opportunities. So I will say in a variety of ways, the governor has proposed a new budget as well as a recovery plan using the federal dollars that has a lot in it for workforce. So again, everything from investing in our CTEs and our community colleges and university system to doing specific sector activity, whether it's healthcare, clean energy, manufacturing jobs where we see growth, but we don't have the workers. But again, a lot of this will come down to sort of these fundamental infrastructure challenges.
Yes.
Parents right now are struggling. They need quality childcare in their community to go back to work. And we're in this kind of challenge where parents are finishing up a kind of choppy school year. They're trying to find summer programs. So that some of that is just, it's a lot for families to work out. So that's a challenge. And again, we all have heard about the housing challenge. We have, places where there are jobs, people are increasingly unable to find rental or ownership opportunities that are affordable. So that's another one. Clearly things like transportation, which I know GPCOG is really focused on, help to meet those challenges. But clearly, there's no silver bullet for workforce. It is about building economies, regional economies, sector-based economies that work, and ensuring that it's all coherent. And that's a heavy lift, but we're trying to do that work more systematically. Again, new federal funding coming in is going to allow us to do some exciting and robust things, but it really is going to require partnerships with employers, with higher ed, and with communities.
And you just used the word coherence, which I think is such an important one, because when we're talking about workforce attraction and retention, which is so key to Maine's future, and it's been a struggle for a long time in Maine to have the workforce that we need. And that relates to childcare, as you said. It relates to housing affordability, and we've had quite the housing price shock, not just in the greater Portland region, but throughout the state. And as people can't afford nearby, they go further, which means that they need more transportation. They need to drive further. That has an impact on greenhouse gases. And then, of course, we've got broadband, which can help us with many of these things. It's like a way of providing access. So let's talk a little bit about that last one, broadband, because I know that there's a new connectivity authority, which is being set up in order to be able to maximize the federal funds coming in. What do you see as the major goals that the state should set for broadband?
Well, I mean, I think the good news is I think we're now working on some big ideas. Actually, the Energy and Utilities Committee is working this new Maine Connectivity Authority tomorrow. And the idea is to really create an entity, kind of like the Maine Turnpike Authority, that doesn't just sort of give out grants, but really makes investments where we leverage dollars and we use taxpayer money to really last for the long term, to expand broadband across our whole state, rural areas that are underserved, but more urban areas that are poorly served. We will be using federal money. Senator King really helped to secure this new capital infrastructure fund, which is really focused on broadband. Plus the governor's putting additional federal money. So over $150 million being invested. It has very ambitious requirements about the speed of internet access. So it's not just having broadband access, but it's got to be high speed. It's got to allow people to work from home, access medical care, education. So it's really envisioning the system that we all need, and it will allow private investments to be better leveraged. It will actually retain some ownership by the people and this authority, so that we're not just, again, giving it to private companies, but really making it last for the long term. So I hope it's a game changer. Clearly, we need a game changer in Maine. I think we all, I've been on a lot of Zoom calls, even with people in the city of Portland, who sometimes have the worst internet access. So clearly, we're moving into a world where remote work is more viable, and but it all requires, connectivity. And so I'm hoping that this will make a big difference. Clearly, I think it's a huge bipartisan focus area for the legislature. So stay tuned, but I think we're heading in the right direction.
It really became so clear this last year how important broadband is. For those of us who've been working in the fields kind of like it for a long time, we knew it, right? And we know that places like in our region, like Bridgeton, Harrison, they've been unserved or underserved. But I was on a Zoom call with somebody that's right on Congress Street. They can only do one Zoom person per office. They have to like crowd around because there's not enough. So it's a pervasive problem throughout Maine. We all need like a major upgrade. You and I also talk a lot about climate change, and you've been leading Maine Won't Wait. And there's a lot in there about transportation, since transportation is the biggest source of greenhouse gases in Maine. And I know that you're also somebody who follows the EV world. I was pretty excited to see what's happening with the F-150 truck the other day, because I know you and I have talked before about not having four-wheel drive on electric vehicles. That really makes it hard in Maine's winter and with a lot of the jobs that we have in Maine. I was wondering if you had any reactions to where you think the EV market is going and how transportation might be changing over the next decade or so in Maine.
Well, it's a big question. Clearly the climate plan, which we put out December 1, again, that seems like several years ago, but we did it in the course of a pandemic, and it really highlights the need to reduce emissions in the transportation sector. And in a rural state where people drive a lot, it's a heavy, heavy lift. So the plan actually calls to put over 200,000 EVs on the road by 2030. So we've got a lot of
ambitious.
And we also are attempting to reduce vehicle miles traveled in the state of Maine, which is also a lift. That requires broadband, land use planning, people living closer, helping people live closer to where they work and go to school. So we're trying to do all the things. I would say the new federal administration in Washington is certainly a game changer. That paired with, it caused General Motors and Ford and all these other companies to suddenly start making these big announcements about phasing out gas-powered vehicles by 2030, 2035. Obviously, the Ford F-150 looks like a normal big truck. It actually has some really cool things, and my husband's already trying to figure out how to put it in order. But that's the kind of thing we need to change the market. Affordable EVs that people can imagine driving.
And that truck also, what's really cool about that is all of us need generation backup, right? A lot of us need that because of the storms, and you can run your house, I understand, for 2 to 3 days off of the motor in the truck. And I was thinking also about construction crews. You can run your work tools right off the truck rather than having to find a way to plug it in or access electricity. It's pretty exciting stuff. So let's talk a little bit about federal funding. Let's start with what we got and then what's coming, because it's a big reservoir of funding. And of course, we in Maine got $1.25, I think, billion worth of coronavirus aid, relief, and economic security through that act, the CARES Act. in our region, as we heard from Nat and Matt, it made a huge difference. We worked really closely with the Department of Economic and Community Development to distribute $67 million to businesses around here. We've been working very collaboratively with transit agencies to distribute some of the CARES transit funds. And of course, you know, for our families and jobs, the Paycheck Protection Act has been really important. But I believe you probably know a lot more about how that funding has been spent. What are some of the ways that the CARES funds have benefited Maine that most people might not be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, you highlighted a few of the big things. So of the 1.25 billion we got from the CARES Act, it was really focused on helping the state survive the pandemic. So the state put a significant amount into pandemic related activities, our public health systems, et cetera. A lot of money went to schools and childcare facilities to support all the things that they had to do, unique things they had to do over the course of the past year. We put over $300 million into our unemployment trust fund to make sure that we didn't see just huge increases for employers in unemployment rates, and obviously provided a significant amount of funds to business relief. Through the programs you described, so lots of money going straight out to businesses, agriculturals and fishery money to really help those industries survive. So it was really about just kind of trying to secure the state of Maine, not the rebuilding necessarily, but obviously those were game-changing funds that really helped the state weather this in a much better way.
That's great. So let's talk about the future, because that money was really helpful to us getting through the last year. And now we've had the American Rescue Plan. Many people call it ARPA, about $4.5 billion coming to Maine. What do you see, like your office is in charge of solving some of our longest term challenges in Maine. What do you see as some of the opportunities where this Rescue Plan Act money can be used to address some of those challenges you're working on day to day?
Well, I mean, hopefully people have checked it out. The governor did put out the Maine Jobs and Recovery Plan, and it's going to be before the Maine legislature as soon as next week. So please stay tuned. We'd love folks to follow that and see what they like about it. There's a lot of funds that we hope will leverage local opportunities as well. I know communities are also thinking about how to spend specific funds that they've received. So we've looked at the plan in three buckets: immediate economic recovery. So continue to do things that help businesses, help the unemployment trust fund, help really kind of hurting heritage industries, for example. So immediate recovery. Then the next bucket is how do we specifically support economic recovery and growth? A lot of that is about our workforce, really building more robust workforce systems, investing in training and education, and helping businesses grow through innovation. So that's number two. And number three is our infrastructure. So the sort of all the traditional infrastructure, from investments in our roads, sewer and water, and our broadband. Those are kind of the most significant. Also things like weatherization, childcare, and housing, you know, again, the things that really underpin our communities. So that's how we've envisioned the fund, sort of in this urgent, immediate economic recovery, really building for future economic growth, and then all the infrastructure required, a lot of which has been long neglected. But how do we really invest in those things that will help kind of underpin future economic growth?
That's great. And let's come back to infrastructure in a second. You mentioned that municipalities, counties, the state, lots of entities are getting funding directly. What do you see as the opportunities for the different levels of government to work together to kind of maximize the impact?
I mean, the governor feels very strongly, and she's spoken to some county groups, she's spoken to MMA, and she really would love to see, and we've tried to set up her funds, the ARP plan, to really think about how do we create pots of money that can, you know, the state puts money in, it will encourage communities or counties to do the same. I would say specifically on broadband, housing, sewer and water, as well as energy efficiency funds that are specifically directed to communities and schools. We see all of those things as ways where, you know, the state will put out these funds, and we really hope it encourages similar activities at the local level. And we've been in conversations with the counties as well as towns about how we create these funds in a way that they leverage each other. Obviously, we're still kind of waiting for the dust to settle on the Maine legislature that has to approve some of this, but we certainly Would love and have been in conversations, but would love to stay in conversations with GPCOG about how to ensure that these funds are most leveraged to really solve long-term solutions, because we could all kind of find ways to probably spend this money quickly. But if we can use it to do, I think we have been using the word transformative, game-changing things, sort of the big swing things that we aren't normally able to fund. Obviously, that puts the state in a much better position for the long term.
I think as a regional organization at GPCOG, we feel a lot of affinity with kind of the mission of your office, in that there are these persistent challenges in Maine. And if there are ways that we can make some serious progress on them in this moment of so much federal funding coming in, it'd be great. And I'm wondering, is there anything that you've got a lot of municipal officials and staff out in the audience today? Is there anything that you would want to ask them to do as they're considering their budgets to work with you?
Well, I would just say, I mean, please check out the plan and see if you like it, and tell your legislator that you do and that you hope that these things pass. I would say we really look forward to once these things solidify, having much more active conversations with communities. We hope to put out a guide once these things get passed by the legislature to say, here, this is where the DEP is putting out sewer and water funds. It's a lot more funding than usual. We hope you consider leveraging it with local funds. Certainly the same thing with broadband. Specifically on the issue of climate, Christina, you and GPCOG have been really great partners to us on this. We have specific funds to start infrastructure adaptation work with the Department of Transportation, but as well as across other agencies. So we're going to pilot that program with hopefully $20 million coming out of these ARP funds. That is really about working with communities to identify adaptation and resilience projects they have been unable to do. We don't really, I know you've done some good work trying to figure out how many projects are shovel ready, but this will be a good kind of kickoff exercise to see. We know there's a lot out there. We are also working through the state budget to create additional funds to support resilience planning at the community and regional level. GPCOG is helping us with a pilot right now of this, funded by philanthropy, but we are hopeful we will see funds in the budget to help with both emission reduction projects, but also resilience projects. So stay tuned, but this is work that we know the state can't do alone. We don't plan to do it alone. Is really helping communities and regions think about this work thoughtfully, start to make plans. Again, it's about climate, but it's also about other economic and community challenges that you identify. So I do hope in the coming months we will be able to roll out much greater opportunity for partnership, but really actually putting some money where our mouth is. Like, we want to partner, but we want to help you do the good work that we know that you all want to do.
Well, we're really excited about the pilot with you, and we're going to be working with, and we started working with Bridgeton and Wyndham on that pilot. And we've had some real superstars in our region, in Portland and South Portland, who are leading the way on climate action. We're very excited to be working with you and towns in other parts of our region on the resilience work. We know with stormwater flow, we've got some real work to do on our roads too, to make sure that they're safe for everybody. So I just have time for one more question. I am going to just say, though, I can't wait to have you back to talk about the American Jobs Plan and the reauthorization of the transportation plan. These are additional potential buckets of money, yes, fingers crossed, that will be coming our way to be more specifically invested in transportation and maybe some climate resiliency, electric vehicle infrastructure, et cetera. So we'll look forward to the next time on that. So I'll just close out on kind of a more office level. I want to talk about the future of the workplace with you, because the state was really instrumental in leading by example, allowing state workers to work remote at the beginning of the pandemic. I know you've been doing that for a while. GPCOG is fully remote right now. We're now thinking about how to go back hybrid. Many of our municipalities have been in person or hybrid for a while. I've been reading a lot, about workforce attraction, and the flexibility has been something that I know our employees and many others appreciate. It's been, even though the pandemic has disproportionately hurt women who are doing caretaking of kids and things like that, the flexibility has been helpful. for women's careers. We know it's had the opportunity to connect to rural residents who could, be remote rather than having to commute a long way. And then, lastly, of course, with climate, it's been reducing the amount that people drive. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what is the state thinking about the future of the workplace? And are you going to try to capture some of these benefits and continue to lead by example?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, Christina, and the state is currently working on our remote working policy, our sort of long-term one. I will say the pandemic was not a good thing in any way, but it certainly sort of completely altered our understanding of what was possible with remote work. And I think the state didn't think that what we've done for the last 15 months was possible, but it actually turned out to be a pretty successful experiment. So in the coming weeks, our Department of Administration and Financial Services is going to be releasing a remote work policy. And I think it will continue to allow the kind of flexible work that we know has been possible. It's not possible for every worker in state government. Obviously, there are public-facing employees who are required. But I think that it's been a game changer. People are thinking about the office in totally new and different ways. That is, I think, exciting and important. And I think we're now trying to figure out the tools that sort of allow people to work collaboratively. There's times when we're all sick of Zoom and we do need to see each other face to face once in a while. But if we think about it in a kind of planned way, we could do it a couple days a week and work remotely the other days. So there's a lot of good thinking. I think, again, it's thousands of workers, so they have to be careful about the policy, but I think it's going to be significant and game changing. I know many employers are leading in similar ways. So I'm hopeful, and it's certainly, we hope it's good for the climate. We certainly hope it's good for families. And I think in many ways, we've all been able to do really important work remotely over this past year. So clearly we've seen thousands of people move to Maine because of this as well. And Maine needs families, it needs young families, it needs workers. So, as long as we can find affordable housing and affordable housing for those people who've been in Maine all along, it does cause that challenge. But I'm hopeful, and I think the kind of complete shakeup in what we thought was possible, it was actually exciting.
What a moment in history we're all living through. And Hannah, I want to thank you so much. I mean, you've been a wonderful partner to our region. You're so accessible. You're so thoughtful, and we're just really grateful to be able to work so closely with you on all of these different issues that really affect our future. So thanks. Can't wait to have you back again.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I would just say again, on behalf of the governor, she really, I think over this course of this past year, we've worked very closely with communities and with groups like COGs like yours. And so we just appreciate the partnership. We know, I hope it builds the base for a lot of important long-term work that we all know needs to be done. So thank you all for the heavy lifting you've done on behalf of the state. And again, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Hannah.
Bye.
Bye. I am going to continue in the spirit of thank yous right now because and offer kind of a mid-event thank you to the GPCOG team who organized today, and also you've been to probably many of our events, leadership tables, coffees with COG, the Momentum series we did on racial equity, and many others. And that events team is led by Tom Bell and Chris Hall and Tori Pelletier, Tony Plant and Katie Murphy, one of our Resilience Corps members, have been really helpful on this. And I want to lastly thank Kat Violet and actually introduce her and welcome her to the screen. She has been working with Tom Bell, our Public Information Officer, on this next celebration of the region's communities and the resilience of our people, and particularly of our municipal staff and volunteers within our municipalities. Kat?
Thank you for the introduction, Christina, and thank you all for being here today. I'm Kat Violet, and I'm an Outreach and Communications Associate here at GPCOG. For the past few months, I've been working with Tom Bell, who heads our communications team, on making a video about how our communities responded to the pandemic. There are many things that we learned in the past year, but above all, I think it highlighted how resilient and caring our communities are. We saw communities work collaboratively and creatively to ensure that people had the support they needed. Through the creation of this video, I got the chance to visit beautiful places like Chevigue Island and Naples for the first time since it's only my second year in Maine, and meet incredible municipal staff and volunteers. I was moved by the stories shared by communities, and I hope you will be too. So without further ado, please enjoy this video.
From the whole team at GPCOG, I want to express gratitude for the municipal staff, the local elected officials, and the volunteers in all of our communities for all that was done for us to take care of one another over the last year. Tremendous energy and community spiritedness exists in our region. And, although we're emerging from this last year, we've got to continue to put this spirit to work in the next year. This next panel focuses on our region's future and how we can work together to build shared and sustainable prosperity. We will explore how we can recover and reinvigorate our economy as well as our communities. At this moment, I'd like to welcome our panelists to the stage. And as they're coming online, I'll give you some brief introductions on who they are. So the first person is Rick Demino. He is the president and CEO of A Better City. He's an old friend of mine from the Boston area. We've worked very closely together on transportation policy. And he's been working also on housing and on climate. He has municipal roots. He's been the commissioner of transportation for the city of Boston. So he will be tremendous to talk to us about what's been happening in Boston, what the parallels are in the Portland area. Durdag, the president and chief operating officer of GWI, is also joining us. Karam, I count among my friends as well. He's been an articulate advocate for broadband, and he is also deeply involved in the New Mainers community and has been ensuring the economic prosperity is shared amongst all of our residents. Kristen Baja is the programs director of the climate resilience at the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, which again is rooted in municipal government. She has a municipal background and helps professionals from both municipalities and the county with climate resilience planning. And lastly, but definitely not least, because I get to work with her all the time, is Lynn Tillotson. She's the president and CEO of Visit Portland. She has been this last year working tirelessly at the front lines of supporting our hospitality industry, which, as you know, is a critical part of the greater Portland economy. I'd love to welcome all of you to the stage.
Thank you, Christina.
Thank you for having us.
So great to see you all. I'm just adjusting my view here so I can see you well. Rick, it's been so long. So glad to see you. Thank you for making time. Kristen, I should call you Baja, right? Baja, you go by Baja. It's wonderful to meet you in person here. And Lynn and Karam, you've been such great partners for GPCOG. All of you have really valuable insights to share with the audience today about what just happened to us this last year and also what's lying ahead. So I am going to ask each of you to briefly introduce yourselves and your organization, just as brief as you can be, and then share one thing that most people don't know about you. And Lynn, I know you have great spunk. Would you kick us off there?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Lynn Tillotson. I'm the president and CEO of Visit Portland. We are the Greater Portland Convention and Visitors Bureau. And let's see, one thing that somebody doesn't know about me, probably that I'm actually a hotelier. I worked at the Orlando World Center Marriott for 14 years. So my history is actually in hotels.
Do you still have like free Disney tickets?
I probably have some connections, yeah.
Good to know. Karam, would you go next?
Yes, so I'm Karam from GWI. We are a fiber internet provider to the state of Maine, and we aim to light up all of Maine to the 21st century. So that's what we do. We're the first actually telecommunications broadband carrier in the United States that's a B Corp. So proud of that. In terms of people not knowing something, well, people may not know that at the age of 13, I was called up for the junior Olympic field hockey team in Pakistan.
Okay, that is something I definitely
Immense.
did not know about you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Rick, would you go next?
Sure. Christina, thanks again for inviting me all the way virtually from Boston. My name is Rick Demino. I'm the president and CEO of A Better City, and we are a business-based organization that's focused on land use, transportation, energy and environment, and the built environment on behalf of the business community. We collaborate with a wide range of stakeholders to kind of shape and influence the built community so Boston, greater Boston and the state can be globally competitive. What you can't see, because I got this fuzzy thing on my background, is some congas behind me because I play bass guitar. And,
wow.
That's what I really love to do when I'm not being the president and CEO.
It's great to know that. And Baja, do tell us where we're finding you today, because I know that you are like on the move.
Yeah, really sorry. I'm actually in a really busy and unfortunate space right by the airport in Baltimore. So my apologies for my background noise and the fact that I'm on my cell phone, but some unfortunate circumstances. But I'm Kristen Baja, I go by Baja. I'm the Program Director for Climate Resilience with the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, which is a network of 240 local governments that work together on innovation and trying to essentially root climate and sustainability and racial equity. And I call myself the mycelium in the forest. We kind of work underground and behind the scene to connect all the trees and to make sure that they are getting the resources and nutrients they need. One thing that I'm sure none of you know about me is I actually played for the US national team for 10 years back in my previous life.
Wow, that's great. Well, thank you guys so much for that. I'm going to ask you to identify in the fields that you're all working, what the biggest, I know there were lots of challenges this last year, but what was the biggest challenge that you saw in your field or your industry during the pandemic? And if you could speak a little bit to whether you see that challenge easing, doubling down, getting worse. And Lynn, I'm very familiar with the work of Visit Portland and with the tourism industry. Maybe you could kick us off again and just tell us a little bit what's been happening with hospitality.
Yeah, I think it's no secret what's been happening with the hospitality industry. COVID certainly has brought to light that our community relies heavily on visitors coming to our destination to support all of our small main businesses. Even the large hotels, even though they're flagged a large corporate property, they're not. They're owned by small businesses. They're owned by many Mainers. So that's probably been the hardest, is watching people really suffer and worry. Can they keep their business open, and what will the future hold for them? Watching them painfully lay off staff. And that's the difficult part now moving forward, is gaining that staff back.
And what's the summer looking like?
The summer's looking really strong as far as visitation, because we're really lucky in Maine that we have a very strong drive market. Obviously we're not going to have cruise ships this year. We're not going to have meetings and conferences. We're not having the international market, the Canadian market, motor coaches, so much of sporting events, all of that stuff that really fills in. What we will get is the leisure market, which is families and individuals and couples that want to travel. Everyone wants to take a vacation right now. They're sick of their homes. So because we have such a strong drive market, and maybe somebody doesn't necessarily have to get on a plane, although the flights coming into the Portland airport are looking really strong, that will help sustain us and get us to a better recovery than some other destinations across the US that are not seeing this quite yet.
That's great. It's good to see us at least coming out. And we're not coming out as strongly as we want, but I know that you're facing a lot of workforce issues also in your industry. So let's stay on the economy for a second. And Karam, I'm going to start not with broadband, but actually with some of the work that you've been doing with new Mainers in the immigrant community. How did the pandemic really hit the new Mainer businesses, and where do you see, is it getting better? Is it getting worse?
Well, I think just like the other businesses, I think they got pretty hard. Part of it is the immigrant business community is Main Street businesses, retailers, along Main Street supporting their communities. So when essentially the throughput traffic goes down, everything sort of goes on to itself. The other thing is access to healthcare is tenuous, and so trying to make sure that they are safe, their families are safe. Given the chaos and the confusion of everything going on, I think it took very intentional efforts by the DHSS to make sure that they were getting the information, that they were getting the tools, the methods, the tricks, the techniques to be able to navigate, because there's a language barrier. So there's also a cultural barrier. Secondly, access to PPP, it's a non-starter, right? So there are these vast infrastructures in place that you need to know how to navigate, and most of them cannot. Not that they don't want to, but they cannot. So I think it's been a tough go. I think coming out of this, call it the trajectory, I think the immediate future is as it is for everybody else, which is guarded. I think the mid to long term, I think, is bright. And part of that is also the awareness by Maine society about the value of inclusion. I think, good, bad, or indifferent, Maine is forced culturally to come out of its introvertedness, this inner shell that we like to have because we are Northern New Englanders. And so with the arise of information, with the arise of what I would call some sensitivities, I think there's a greater realization that this society needs to be inclusive, and it needs to be able to invite itself towards working together and not being unintentionally exclusive. So I think given the census tract, the demographic tracks, I think there's a realization that you need to be inclusive. So I think that's a good thing.
And we also
It's
know
tough.
Yeah.
It's too good.
It's tough, and we also know that New Mainers tend to actually start businesses as entrepreneurs, 1 or 2 person kind of employee businesses faster than other groups, and so that's really good for our economy, given how old our population is in Maine. So
Correct.
Let's stay with infrastructure for a minute. I'm going to touch quickly on broadband and go to Rick on transportation and housing, and then we're going to wrap up just on climate and sustainability and how that has played out when so many of us have been so laser focused on the pandemic. So Karen, I'm sticking just with you for a second. Talk a little bit about what you think the biggest challenge around broadband has been and how we're emerging out of that.
Well, the truth of the matter is our telecommunications infrastructure in the United States is not up to par to 21st century standards. It's not. It's also controlled by monopolies, which is not right. It's not fair. So I think coming out, I think there's a tectonic shift in the telecommunications industry where new infrastructure is being built, new entrants are coming into the market space, the fiber technology, which has been around for close to some 20 odd years, is now getting into the broader markets. And you have consumers saying, now I have purchasing choices, I have purchasing decisions. What I want to spend my money on should reflect my values and my systems. So you're going to see essentially a changing sands in the telecommunications. Partly because, as you know, in the rural areas, it is inequitable what they're going through. You and I may be on this Zoom call right now, but our friends and families and neighbors outside the metro areas cannot. And
I'm sure that
unable to.
Some of the participants that are on the phone from Harrison, from Sebago, they're probably getting glitches during this.
Glitches, the wheel, the death of life, the wheel that goes around and around. It's just not fair. And you have to also realize that a lot of that, if we do not take care of it, translates to the vastening of the economic divide, where the haves and the have-nots will become vaster and vaster and vaster. And that is simply inevitable. So the telecommunication industry is realizing that. The telecommunication industry is going, oh, well, now we have to be able to build new infrastructures as well for the next 100 years, because what we got now doesn't work anymore. So fair amount of tumult. There's also a lot of federal and state dollars pouring in. There's a lot of private capital, looking at things. Also, the municipalities are empowered now through various pieces of legislation and federal mechanisms to do things that they believe they should do.
Yes.
So rather than being top down, it's more grassroots driven.
Yeah. And
There's
we're
a greater
involved.
realization. Yeah.
It's great stuff. And like in the Lakes region of our region, you know, we're working with 5-6 municipalities that are trying to put together kind of a regional plan
Correct.
for broadband expansion.
Correct.
It's great, you know, because broadband, just like roads, and I'm coming to you, Rick, next, broadband doesn't end at the municipal border. So speaking of infrastructure, broadband and transportation often go together. I think of them as access. So Rick, I know we've had, when I was working with you in Massachusetts, we had many ups and downs. We were talking about transportation and how it connected to affordable housing. What's been the biggest challenge you think in those two areas that you've been seeing in your world?
Thanks, Christina. And I want to just tell Lynn that I'm one of those people that would love and always do drive to Greater Portland and enjoy the great, incredible hospitality of your great state. And I love the islands. I love Portland. It's a great place to visit. And sometimes I'll skip further north and go to Bar Harbor and try to walk around those mountains where I used to when I was a kid. Not as much a gazelle as I used to be, but it's a great state and you guys are doing great things. I love the video. Talk about Mainers working together. That video really showed some real good aspirational connections between all of you helping each other. But just as in Maine, we in Boston, in Greater Boston, Massachusetts, had some challenges as well. Relative to the pandemic, really the early issue, and Christina, I know you know our state well, was really the concerns that we had about transit-dependent riders in the region, and also in the other rural and suburban RTA areas, regional transit authority areas, because the question marks around how people can use transit during the pandemic and how transit was going to stand up during the pandemic was critically important. Just like Maine and Portland, you have people that had to get to work, particularly in your hospital industries and some of the other locations where demand for access to a job was very high. And here in the Greater Boston area, that meant a lot of people of color, a lot of transit-dependent riders needed to get to those locations, our healthcare facilities, our home care facilities for senior citizens. And when we weren't ready to address that relationship to transit connections, it really caused some havoc. So what we did is we worked with the T to stand up, the business community working together with the T, and I got to give the T a lot of credit, to kind of pivot as quickly as we could to get riders. I mean, first of all, we needed to make sure the T system itself was safe. And then we needed to make sure the workers were safe. And then we needed to make sure that the ridership can use the system safely. Literally, Christine, you should know, Gillette Corporation donated 5,000 masks to the T and then 500-gallon tanks of sanitation. That's how closely we started to all work together.
That's
to make
fantastic.
sure that we can keep our systems working. So the transit system really then ended up responding well. We had to work hard on social distancing, work hard on sanitation, and we're starting to see close to 40% of transit ridership coming back, but we're going to come back sooner. So that's the other thing. The governor of Massachusetts just opened up the whole state at the end of this month. So how do we get transit demand to be at the levels that it once was prior to the pandemic? You remember, Christina, Boston was one of the most congested cities in the country, if not the worst. How do we get our transit system to welcome people back and then be ready to go to make sure that we can get back to our pre-pandemic mode split so that our urban economy and our connectivity and mobility can go forward? Very big issue.
And Rick, I'll just contribute here a little bit. You know, we've had a very similar situation in Maine where our transit agencies, we have 7 of them in our region rather than just like a big T. And they've all had to work really hard to keep passengers safe, make sure that essential workers could still get to hospitals, grocery stores, et cetera. And now, you know, we're thinking about how do you rebuild ridership, because some people aren't coming back. And so what are the innovations we need to take as a transit industry in order to really make sure that transit is financially stable over the long term, you know, and always improving it. So very different transit systems, but really similar challenges. You talk a little bit about how that relates to housing, because in Maine, We have a lot of people from Massachusetts, which I won't say anything negative about because I'm originally from Massachusetts, but we got a lot of people from Massachusetts and New York buying up homes up here, and our housing prices in Maine are skyrocketing, and we're really dealing with a housing crisis. For those of you who heard Hannah Pingree from the governor's office right before this, she must have said housing 6 or 7 times during her presentation, and that is just a growing challenge here. So Massachusetts has long had an affordable housing challenge, and we're on the front edges of it compared to the Boston area, but it relates directly to transit access. So talk a little bit about that, Rick.
Sure. So one of the things that we all in our communities need to get our arms around if we want to solve a housing crisis is density. And the word density is tough enough in Massachusetts. So I can only imagine how tough it is when we're talking to Mainers.
Very tough.
Right. But it's really something that's critically important. And I know that your organization probably studied a lot about the regional Vancouver plan, would look at creating density and then protecting its open spaces.
Yes.
So that,
potential.
And I will admit, again, Lynn, we love your open spaces up there. It is something that we all drive to do and become part of. So Maine has to protect what is actually one of its critical assets, but you also have to house the people who want to live there. And you're seeing, as was suggested, more people needing access to affordable housing as new populations come to your state, which is actually a good thing because you have tremendous workforce demands. So you have to welcome those people if you want to fill the jobs in Maine. So you got to get the housing part right. And so that may mean really looking at some very specific zoning changes and some opportunities to really create some housing that's both attractive, but at the same time builds community and networks so people can live and work and play in places where all that can take place, but at the same time is affordable. And and really communities can mix well if we just give them a chance. And I think we really do need to do that. And I do think, obviously, as you think of your own current and future transit nodes, transit-oriented development is still important, even in great states like Maine.
Lynn, it looks like you want to jump in, and we're going to get to Baja next. So go ahead.
If you don't mind, I'll just mention the housing thing. The interesting thing is I've been on many panels, many discussions about the lack of workforce in Maine. We're aging, our kids won't stay, they can't afford to stay. And of course that affects the hospitality industry as well. And what I find interesting is that I mentioned I was a hotelier in Orlando. I moved out of Maine, went to Orlando, and they hooked me. There's apartment complexes everywhere that are affordable for young adults to move into. And so you move into an affordable apartment, maybe with a roommate, you stay there, you get integrated in the community, your job continues to grow, then you might meet a significant other. I met my husband there. We had our first child there. The only reason why we didn't want to stay in Orlando was because the school system was not good. We have that here in Maine. We can attract young workers and get them ingrained in the community if we provide them with housing. And I'm so excited. I was on John Roberts Road in South Portland the other day behind Home Depot, and I saw an apartment complex. It was an apartment complex, I believe, not a condo unit. And I'm really hoping that it's affordable for teens and young adults to be able to integrate. So it's just my little pitch about the density that, Rick, you're talking about. Those apartment complexes can help us for the future.
So, our young people and to come here, they definitely need affordable housing and different kinds of housing choices, right? But they also come here because of our open spaces, as Rick was talking about. And we've got 14 AmeriCorps who've come here, many of them from outside of the state, because this is a beautiful place to be. So Baja, you are working to sustain natural resources, open space, help municipalities and the counties really create resiliency, environmental resiliency. Can you tell us a little bit about what it's been like in your field this last year when we've been focused on COVID, right? But we still have a climate crisis and sustainability issues and open space being gobbled up. Tell us a little bit about what's been happening and where you think things are going.
Well, I think we're still in the midst of it, actually. I think immediately what happened in the very beginning is that we were trying to make the case for proactive action and continuing to work on climate change as it deeply relates to COVID and the fact that we are in a global pandemic. So the gobbling up of the open space, the taking of the forested areas, the interaction with species that we potentially shouldn't be interacting with the way that we are, did lead to this crisis. And so they're deeply intertwined and connected. And I think what happened is all the resources and capacity and focus, like you said, sort of hyper focused in on one area and forgot that the biggest story before that time was the wildfire season in Australia and California, or the massive hurricanes, or the other sort of big storm events, and that none of this has stopped. And so our members really were working on making the case for how are we considering the discontinuation of extraction, both from people and from resources, and changing the paradigm, getting out of the idea of engaging with folks and actually partnering with people, treating whole humans over infrastructure, looking at sort of a social infrastructure, as we see with this new administration, as a core component, rather than it being something that comes after the sort of technological or technical infrastructure. So we've seen our members do a big shift, and it's a lot into centering humans over the hazards, into bringing the whole self into the work. I think even supporting people who are dealing with the fact that I'm presenting to you from outside an airport right now. It's like very strange, but we're making these things work. And so, it's going to be a piece where we have to be able to work at all different levels and on multiple different things at the same time. And they're all intersected and they're all intertwined. What Rick was talking about with housing and transportation is deeply intersecting with all of the work we're trying to do on protecting open space and seeing whole humans, centering equity, and really looking at that social cohesiveness and connectivity. So I see all of these things as deeply connected, and yet we can't stop doing them in order to just hyper focus on one. We have to maintain the ability to kind of do all and continue to be proactive.
That's great. Thank you so much for that, Baja. It brings to mind that old saying of think globally and act locally, and you just brought up some of the big global things and how at all levels of government, in all sectors, private, public, nonprofit, we need to be working towards something. And we've experienced a global crisis this last year with the pandemic, but we're still experiencing a global crisis in terms of the increasing greenhouse gases that are changing the way that we work and we live. So I want to play like a little bit of connect the dots here, because some people might not quite understand why I have the four of you on this screen, right? We've got a sector of the economy, a really important sector of the economy in Greater Portland, talking about new Mainers and immigration, as well as broadband. We got transportation, we got housing, we got sustainability, open space, and climate. And so we like to think big in our region, even though we're small. We like to punch above our weight and connect all the dots. And Rick, you're awesome at this. So I want to throw out like a word here, and I want you to tell me how it relates to transportation and housing. So I'm gonna start with economy.
It's the heart of the economy. Transportation and housing, and I guess I'll add education, are really the three cornerstones of our economy. And I think that, connectivity to where people live and to where the jobs are is really what helps families sustain themselves, and making sure that all of those choices are real and reliable and safe and pleasurable. I mean, one of the other aspects about Maine, and I know the winters can be challenging, but I have to say Portland has some really, really wonderful, importantly, some wonderful walkable areas. And celebrating that walkability of your city, and I know you know about this, Christina, is really important. And the other aspect of Portland, and also the population that you have, is that many of your folks will take their bikes, and that is a growing trend. But anyway, transportation and housing cornerstones of the economy. I hope that gives you your quick answer.
That's great. Yeah. And we're gonna do a little bit more here. Like I'm gonna throw out equity, which is about how we share the resources amongst us. And Karam, I'm gonna say, how does that relate to broadband?
Internet is a human right. Everybody should be able to participate in the underpinnings of civilization: power, water, sewer, internet.
Great.
And so you cannot have a functional economy, you cannot have a functional society if it's not equitable.
Period. I love that. That was such a short and sweet answer. Thank you, Karam. All right, Lynn, open space, go. How does that relate to your sector?
It's what drives visitors, for sure. I mean, one of the things that we saw through the pandemic is that they chose Maine because of our open space. And we have to balance that here in Greater Portland as well. Certainly Rick talked about density, but we need the open space as well. We can't lose the drive that brings people here.
Great. All right, Rick, I'm going to give you another one. Sustainability. How does it relate to housing?
It means whether or not people can actually survive in housing. It's the essence of housing, meaning from the idea of being able to provide an energy resource to your home that's viable and at some point renewable, to the idea of being able to protect yourself from heat zones and, as you know, in your coastal areas, flooding. So sustainability has to underpin a housing strategy. And in fact, it needs to lead sustainability needs to be one of the leading principles of housing development.
Great. Thank you, Rick. Baja, I'm going to ask you to do it with transportation. How does transportation relate to climate and resilience?
Oh, it's a core component of obviously what puts out the greenhouse gases, but also is a huge element of how we move around and interact and work together around the world. So in order to improve the way that we connect as humans and become more sustainable systems, we have to actually be thinking about all of these systems and how they overlap and interact. Transportation system obviously is a huge sector, both for providing and putting carbon out there, but also an opportunity, right, for improvement, and all kinds of opportunities exist in all different levels there.
So Baja, I'm going to continue here with you because, resilience, community resilience and regional resilience covers all of these areas. And I know you work with a lot of different cities and towns and counties throughout the country. Can you tell us a few places that are doing really interesting things that we might be able to learn from?
Yeah, what a lot of our members are doing are actually, they're reframing the concept of resilience. So instead of resilience being this concept of bouncing back to where we were, it's actually thinking of resilience in a holistic manner, a comprehensive manner. It's resilience being year round. We want communities to be resilient and to have that adaptive capacity in the year round. So we have a lot of places that instead of doing the bounce back or the focus on emergency management are actually focusing holistically on community cohesiveness, connectivity, that social infrastructure, how we're bringing in affordable housing as a component of resilience, how we're bringing in transportation connectivity as a component of resilience, and bringing in all of those different systems. So it is global, but it's also going down to the individual level of what do you need on a daily basis to be resilient. In that reframing, it's helping to reutilize the funding differently, to be able to allocate it to something that people on a daily basis are getting support for their services and programs. Fort Collins is doing an amazing job in this space right now. They're actually reframing their entire process to be around whole humans and getting into the affordable housing first and transportation systems first. I would also say cities that are really far ahead are ones like Evanston or Asheville, who are also starting to do reparations-based financing and other work like that to come to acknowledge the history of where we are, why some communities are not as resilient as others, or have had to be more resilient based on the different prejudice and racism in our policies and practices. So how are we making sure that we're looking at resilience holistically? And that's where we're seeing a lot of progress in our communities.
Thanks, Baja. And Rick, I'm going to go quickly back to you on this because I know Boston's done a lot of resiliency planning. What do you think are some of the things that we should be learning from the work that's being done in that city?
So, one of the cornerstones of our work was really doing good scientific based work, specifically around our vulnerability assessment. We did a very thorough, and if Greater Portland hasn't had a chance to do this yet, I would highly encourage you to do a vulnerability assessment to understand what it means to see greater levels of precipitation. And I know it's hard to think about in Maine, but higher levels of heat and heat zone influences that might occur up in your part of our country. And also, of course, coastal flooding, surges, and also its relationship to equity. And the relationships to equity, as Baja was talking about. We have a serious set of equity concerns relative to very vulnerable populations that will be affected by climate impacts. And so that vulnerability assessment really needs to be all inclusive, and it also really needs to detail where the most vulnerable areas of Greater Portland are, and also then begin to develop strategies to address them that are both physical as well as social and economical, and also related to the issues of equity.
And thank you for bringing up equity, because with COVID-19, we know that the hardest hit populations, the demographics, were our older adults, folks in rural areas eventually, and of course people of color, New Mainers. And it's, when you look at vulnerability assessments for climate throughout the world, it's those same populations that get really hit the hardest with climate. So thanks for bringing that up. I'd like to ask each of you to kind of turn a little bit more to the future about an opportunity for how we can build back stronger, and in each of your fields. And again, I'm going to ask you to be brief. And Lynn, I'm going to start with you. Just, there's been such a transformation in the hospitality industry. We had outdoor dining, we had closures, we have openings, we have capacity limits, all sorts of things have been happening. Where do you see the biggest opportunity for this sector of the economy as we're slowly emerging from the pandemic?
I think it's probably just staying at the table as much as we've been brought into it during the pandemic. Just reminding everybody that tourism is a huge piece of our economy, and to make sure that we're sort of thought of during the whole process of anything that might happen. I feel like there's always two pillars that drive our economy. It's our residents, right? But it's also the visitors that help support everything that the residents love about living here. And I know on the side, I've been talking to Chris Hall for some time about partnering together. I think it would be really important to do a tourism master plan, to really look at it as a region, how we're growing, how we grow smart, how we are inclusive with everything, and really work towards the future and what that looks like.
Okay, thank you so much, Lynn. Karam, how about you? What do you see as some of the biggest opportunities as we're emerging?
Build fiber networks everywhere and to everyone.
And
It'll help us drive less. It'll help you to get better healthcare. It'll allow your kids to be able to do homework, all three of them, while they're jumping over the couch and trying to figure out what to do.
Sounds like you have some experience with that.
It uses less power. Fiber networks use 50% less power than the current coax or the copper-based. So it helps to save the planet.
Explain that a little bit more for our audience about fiber, what you were just saying about fiber versus other things.
So fiber networks is essentially information delivered over a cable that has glass in it, rather than the copper or the coax cable that comes to your home today. So fiber networks today, all over the United States, deliver the signals to all the cell towers. Actually, it exists. It exists for the military. It exists for the state governments. It exists today for commercial companies, right? But it doesn't exist at a mass scale for 330 million Americans to their premises, to their homes. So that needs to change. And if it does change, it will allow us to have open spaces because we will drive less. It'll make us kids happier. It'll allow us to access telehealth so that you can get the access, especially in the rural areas, we're driving, 2.5 hours. It'll allow us actually to be able frankly, to be together and culturally lower the barriers of inclusion. It allows our neighbors in the rural areas to participate in the 21st century economy. Their websites will work better. Their payroll systems will work better. They'll be able to attract more people to come and be able to work remotely so that we can have jobs sitting over here, enjoying the sun and the sunshine, and working for a company in Seattle. It'll be fine. So it allows Maine to externalize, so build fiber networks.
That's
And if
great.
you're looking for an example, the Baltics have done it, the East European countries have done it. Essentially, people that are like us, they have done this at a very, very, very large scale. And
Yeah,
there's no reason why Maine should have a lesser internet service than, say, New York, Chicago, Miami, Los Angeles. Zero reason.
or other countries. I mean, you're bringing up that
Other countries.
there are developing countries that have better fiber than we have. You know, last year, Mainers passed a $15 million bond for high-speed internet, and we have quite a bit of federal funding coming in thanks to our federal delegation. So there's some really great opportunities to seize this next year. I know Baja is having a little trouble with her video, but Baja, can you speak to some, hopefully you can still hear me. Can you speak to what you think are some of the big opportunities in building resilience this next year?
Yeah, you know, I think there's a really great opportunity, like I was mentioning before, of the reframing of resilience. I think it's also shifting away from this idea of just response recovery and being entirely in the response and recovery cycle, and doing a lot of more of that proactive action that is centered in neighborhoods. And I think there are a lot of opportunities to, for example, shift away from the idea of having just heat centers and cooling centers or emergency shelters, and actually creating neighborhood sites that people can use year round to go to for services and programming, access to communication, but can also be hubs for job training opportunities and understanding of different assets and components within a neighborhood. So I think we just have to shift the mentality. We're really stuck as a species, I think, right now in response recovery, and that's not going to stop because we have so many things coming our way. But instead, shifting our process and our approach and centering at the neighborhood level first, and then moving out from there, and really, instead of the idea of empowering, instead shifting power through the process to the members of the community so they have the ability to be more self-determining rather than having to rely on a lot of the systems that aren't serving them well. So I think it's a lot more of the awareness of being aware of our own sort of work that hasn't done well in the past and hasn't succeeded in the past, and then moving into this ability to change that process and shift power to community members and community-based partners as part of our work. That will help to increase resilience and hopefully change the way and the dynamics that we interact.
Thank you so much, Kristen, for that. It's really, it's such an interesting thing to think about how much all of us have had to be reacting this last year, and how hard it is to keep an eye on the ball for say goals of universal broadband access, or bringing back the full economy, or addressing affordable housing and sustainability. And, you know, we really have such amazing opportunity right now with where the federal funds are to be able to do some pretty great things together. Rick, I'm going to ask you to close us out on this, on public transportation in particular, because it has been a real struggle over the last year for our public transportation agencies. What do you see as a big opportunity as we're emerging from the pandemic for public transportation becoming stronger?
Well, in Greater Portland, and Christina, I know you guys have been focusing on this, you have two really significant opportunities. Greater Portland and Portland is part of a Northeast corridor and is part of what we like to call a mega region. And how you think about Portland and Greater Portland as part of that mega region, which connects through Boston, goes into Connecticut and New York, and even all the way down to DC, is really important. And how we think about passenger rail and high-speed passenger rail within that corridor is critically important, because the work sheds then get bigger. And people from different parts of the Northeast corridor can connect economies and clusters. Clusters that we might have in Boston might be able to move up to Portland, Maine. clusters that might have relationship and access to work and workforce in Boston might see that as being more viable. So the first thing I want to say is think about passenger rail, and then think about regional rail. Also, how do you connect within Maine relative to your job sheds and also the connectivity of your economies and clusters? And then finally, not only regional rail, but EMUs, electrified motorized units, which I know you're aware of. But you can imagine within greater Portland, knowing the rail network that you have, ways to connect your communities that are 21st century, that are being done in other parts of the world. So that's the first point I wanted to make, is really thinking about rail in a 21st century way, relative to both your relationship within the Northeast Corridor, but also your relationship to connecting people within Greater Portland and also within your state. The other point I want to make is that you have a heavy reliance on surface transportation. So Portland and Greater Portland could be one of the leaders in this country in thinking about how to make their surface transportation electric, and how to make that electric surface transportation system a 21st century system, and really be the leaders in environmental opportunities that relate to how your surface transportation system runs and connects, and also the mini networks of surface transportation, the 1 mile opportunities, connecting rural areas to other economic centers in your communities, and how surface transportation, and yes, BRT or exclusive lanes for buses, and I know you're very familiar with this, can really be part of it. And the couple of last points. You're blessed with an incredible water transportation system already. You need to reimagine that water transportation system. It's wonderful, it's amazing, I love it. But what's the 21st century water transportation system for Portland, Maine need to look like, and how does resiliency factor into that? Because obviously that's going to be challenged relative to sea level rise, and how do your peer structures and connections work? And then right now, Christina, and you know this because you helped me do this in Massachusetts, what are your transportation infrastructure priorities, and how do you want to move? And I'm thinking, think bold, because I know you know how to think like that, and I know based on this call that Portland and Mainers know to think like that. What are the big things that you want your delegation to push for you? How do they relate to this master plan that Lynn was talking about? And really make sure that you get really good at leveraging these federal dollars in relationship to the infrastructure needs that you have.
So Rick, I knew when I invited you to be part of this panel that you were going to give us some really big ideas to chew on. And those were 4 of them. So thank you so much for that. And it's great for us to always, as Mainers, be thinking about what the bigger visions are, and this is a moment in time to be ambitious, because there are resources unlike Maine has seen, at least that I know of, ever. So it's a pretty exciting time. Our time is at our end right now. I want to thank all of you for your insights on how we continue to overcome the challenges of this last year. And we start to use, and I'm going to use Rick's word here, reimagine, how our communities can be better for the future and also for everyone. And so thank you guys so much for being here. Can't wait to reconnect with you as we go through this year. So thanks so much, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Christina.
And I am now, thank you guys. I'm now going to welcome back to the virtual stage our fearless leader, Nat Tupper. And as he's coming on, I want to offer my thanks to all of you who have been here on this sunny afternoon, sticking through this. I expect this to be our last remote summit. I'm very hopeful that it's our last remote summit. And I am missing walking over with all of you to the Stone Barn at St. Joseph's in Standish to catch up in person over food and drink. So we'll be looking forward to that next year. Nat, thank you again for everything you've done this year. And I welcome you to close us out today.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm also looking forward to getting back to St. Joseph's, having left so much tuition money there. It feels good to go back and visit now and then. So I have 4 of mine. So anyway, I want to thank everyone for being here with us on this summit. We're all optimistic that we'll be able to return to in-person gatherings this year, and hopefully next year it will feel like a real reunion where we'll get together in person. I want to offer my thanks to all the presenters and the panelists today. They were great. I thank them very much. We appreciate the time that you took to share your thoughts and ideas, your words of wisdom, and your vision, because it's what we need. Thank you. I want to thank all the staff that focused so much time and care to make today's presentations and sessions so well organized, so relevant and meaningful. It's the work that you do all year long, and you didn't fail us one little bit even today. So thank you. I can't name you all, but I do want to particularly thank Tom for the work on that video. That was so awesome, and there were fair number of comments about it as well. And to all the citizens and the organizations in our region who were part of not only of that video, but are doing so much all the time to bind our community together and to help us build for the future and to care for one another. It's so great to be part of this collaborative exercise throughout the region. So I thank you all for your great work and for being here. And that's the end of today's program. Thank you very much.